a paper in English, how to set the sequence of and the aid that you should write. So I'm looking forward to the information that's going to. This is especially important for the students who are starting to trade. So Professor Osvaldo is already the presenter. I don't see your, I don't hear.
Yes, he's the presenter. We can.
Yeah. So at any time you want, you can start, Professor.
Thank you very much, George, Edson, Alexandre, and all of our from UBS. It's a pleasure to be to you and to the students. The sense is targeted at multinational authors, for especially those who are who speak Latin languages, whose structure is similar to English, but there are a few differences which make us confused in many cases. So I will start sharing my screen. I'm already doing this. And, the first slide. The title is I started to write scientific papers in English, as I said, targeted multinational students. So the of my So the of my presentation on a book that my friend some colleagues published a few ago with writing tools for non-native English users.
Osvaldo, I don't see your screen. Do you see the screen, Edson?
No, I think not being shared, or we can see at least.
I think
he's gone. No, he's coming back. Oh, now it's not. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Now somehow something happened.
Yeah.
See my screen now?
I see your screen. Yeah, I don't see question yet. That's great. That's.
So I'm changing the slide. Did you see it?
Yeah.
So my presentation is going to be based on this that I published with colleagues a few years ago. So I started by making one distinction, and then also mentioning about scientific method as well as scientific writing. The first distinction I make is that scientific writing is part of academic writing. Academic writing involves writing in the area of science and technology, humanities and social sciences, whereas scientific writing is devoted to all areas, hard sciences, life sciences, engineering, but not including humanities and social sciences. The reason being that with scientific writing, we usually have a much more stereotype type of text. So the text is there is much more. It's much more standardized than in humanities and in social sciences. The other thing which is important to comment is that when you are learning how to write a good paper, it means that you need to have a grasp of the scientific method as well. So in learning the scientific writing concepts, you also learn about the scientific method, because you cannot do one thing without the other. And writing a paper means that you want to convey a message. And the message you want to convey is you want to talk about the contributions of our work, why these contributions are important. And one good way of starting writing a paper, or even writing a project, is to write in a single sentence what your contributions are all about. So you need to have a defining sentence which shows all of your contributions. For those of you who may say that I'm writing a paper or I'm writing a thesis which took me months or years to complete, and it has a lot of data, a lot of results, how can I write the main contribution in one single sentence? My point is that when the Nobel Prize winners are announced at the end of the year, they announce a prize that could go to 3 separate groups. So it could be 3 scientists work in different labs with independent work. And when the prize is announced, the Academy gives the reason why that prize was awarded to those 3 scientists, 2 or 3 scientists. The reason is given in one single sentence. So my point is, if a prize, a Nobel Prize, which can give to 3 different scientists, can fit in one sentence, it's very unlikely that your work or my work or anybody's work in a paper or for a paper will not be fitting in one single sentence. So we should always be able to write this sentence to define the contributions. I'm insisting on this, and I'm spending some time in talking about this sentence, because this sentence should be reflected in the title of the paper. It should come in the abstract of the paper when you give the purpose of the paper. You should write this sentence. It should come in the results and discussion. It should come again in the conclusions. But mind you that I cannot write the same thing with the same wording in different parts of the paper. Every time I write this sentence, I need to use different wording. And this is one of the reasons why we need a lot of linguistic variety. I must be able to say things in English in different ways, say the same thing in different ways. And the strategy that I'm going to talk about today is about getting this variety in the linguistic use of English. Then, before you can start writing, you have to organize the ideas and results. You have to identify the key findings. Obviously, now there can be several findings, not just one contribution, but several findings. You need to highlight the importance of those findings, organize them in not in a chronological way, but in a logical way. And obviously, you have to assess whether these findings are sufficient for a publication. I like this quote by Professor George Whiteside, who is from the chemistry department in Harvard University, because he's quite a prolific author with more than 1,000 papers published. And he says, interesting and published is equivalent to non-existent. So we should try and publish everything that we do, provided there is quality there. But one thing which is relevant is that once you go about writing a paper, what the paper should convey mostly is not results, but ideas. So scientists publish ideas and concepts, not only results. Obviously, in most areas, like in your, I believe perhaps for all of you in a physics department or in a department like chemistry or medicine, engineering, or like in my work that I do, I cannot publish a paper just with ideas without results to sort of support these ideas. But the important thing is that the ideas are the central part of the paper, ideas and concepts, not only results. So much so that a flow chart for a research paper or a thesis is like that. You conceive the ideas, which means you identify the problem, scientific or technological problem to be addressed. You have the ideas there, then you implement your research, which could be theoretical, computational, experimental research, it doesn't matter. You get the results, but then the important thing, you should not jump from results to the output. You should translate those results into ideas, which could be different from the original ones. It's often the case that as we develop our project, we notice that the results we get are not the ones we expected. And therefore, we may have new ideas. The product at the end may be different from what we believe it would be in the beginning. So this paper or thesis should be written about these new ideas. So now coming to the anatomy of a paper. So you have, I'll go through this very quickly because I think most of you are familiar with this. So you have title, authors and affiliation, then you have abstract. I'll come back to the abstract later on. And then you have this movement in the paper. This movement is such that in the introduction, you go from the general to the specific. So you start with a more general subject, the topic of our research, and then at the end of the introduction, you customize the introduction to mention what you have done. So this movement is important because that's what a reader is expected to find. On the other hand, in the conclusions, you make the opposite movement. You will start with the key findings, which is your findings in the manuscript, interpretation, and then the contributions, the implications of those results or those findings. So the movement is opposite to what the conclusions the introduction does. And then I will concentrate on the abstract for some time because that's obviously the most important part of a manuscript of a paper. So there are two ways to write an abstract. One is descriptive, in which you describe what you have done, the nature or purpose of the study, but you don't mention the main contributions, you don't mention the main results. This way of writing an abstract is not adequate for an original paper. So if the paper is for original work, this descriptive way is not adequate. This is only adequate if you're writing a review paper, because in a review paper, you are saying the summary or the abstract, what is the contents of the review paper. So you may mention the main contributions, you may mention the main topics, but the main contributions in a given field could have been achieved not by authors themselves, but from others from the literature. And therefore, in the abstract, you have a description of what the paper contains. On the other hand, if it's an original paper, the abstract should be informative, in which all contributions should be there. Results, including numerical results. And if one of the main contributions in the manuscript is something that you are measuring and you have a value, then that should be included. Like, for instance, efficiency in a solar, if you have, the temperature, if you are a superconductor and then you have a high temperature superconductors, the temperature at which you reach its superconductivity should be in the abstract. And so the abstract should contain different components. So setting and background, you may have to put it, but it should be included. Purpose, methodology, main results, and conclusion. Again, components that you expect to find in an abstract. If, for instance, you are writing a manuscript for a letter type of journal in which the requirement is that the abstract should be very short, say 100 to 150 words at most, then you usually have to drop this component, so you should not have setting background, for instance, and we start the abstract with the purpose. The purpose is compulsory. It should always be there because the purpose is the component in the abstract which brings the defining sequence, the defining sentence. So the sentence that defines the main contributions should be in the purpose. Now, about the introduction, because we want to talk, we want to comment on different ways of learning how to acquire the scientific discourse in English. That's to say, we want to learn how we say things in English. Because, in many cases, we know what you have to say. We know, we have it in our mind, everything set up for what we want to say. And then the thing is that if you are if you're a non-native speaker of English, the tendency is that we translate, we think that in Portuguese, we translate that into English and then you write and put it in paper. This is not an efficient way of doing this because in many cases, the structure of the wording that you use in English is not, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound natural for a native speaker. So the whole thing is we want to learn how to write as a native would do. So to acquire this knowledge, my suggestion is that we compile a very large database that we call corpus of text written by native speakers. And this then so that we can learn by example. That's why we need, for instance, for introduction, we need a very detailed classification of the components. So this is a model for an introduction. The introduction can have up to 8 components. So setting again, similar to the abstract, review and different ways of writing the review of the literature, types of gap, purpose, methodologies, and so on and so forth. Every component has different strategies that you could use. Obviously, in a single introduction, you don't use all the strategies, you don't use all the components. But if you choose some of these components, these are the strategies that are used, that are normally used. Here I should normally used. Here, I should point out that this model was not conceived from the start. This model was inferred from the literature. So what my colleague Sandra Luiz did many years ago now, she analyzed a very large number of papers in physics, and then she identified which were the components and then the strategies, all the sections of a paper. I'll show later on a slide with the address of a website where you can find all this information in case you need it. So what we want to find sentences that would information for all those strategies, for all these components. Because I'm going to write my own paper. If I want to the introduction, I say, I want to state, and then I go to a list of sentences and expressions and find 6 expressions to what I as I mentioned, there is a place where you the components and strategy of all sections in a paper. So summary or abstract, introduction, methodology, results, discussion, and conclusions. There's one interface in English, one interface in Portuguese, then you can choose. For every single one, there is an explanation of what these components mean. This is for summary, for abstract. It is setting, gap, purpose, methodology, results, and conclusion. And in each case, you have the strategies as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is it's called the Amadeus strategy, which means which is translated into learning by doing. So we want to see how other people write, other authors write a manuscript, and then you want to imitate what they do. So, and why this strategy is efficient? It's efficient because it's an area called Corpus Linguistics, and it's efficient because when you produce text, either spoken text or written text, we do not make a sentence word by word. We have chunks of text in our minds. So in our minds, we have preformed chunks of text, which come easily when we are going to write in a language that we master. And the same applies to any language, and that's what we want to do for another language, not our language, but another language. So this strategy is based on learning by example. So you do critical analysis of the scientific discourse. So that's what I mean, corpus linguistics. And I'll take perhaps 20 minutes, 25 minutes to talk about this strategy, but obviously it only works if you practice a lot. So it may take months or years, depending on how much time how much effort you put into it. So, and what's corpus linguistics? That's the definition that is brought by Wikipedia. This is a well-established area in linguistics, and now it's also well-established that one way of learning scientific writing is through corpus linguistics, which means that you are going to study. A corpus is a bed of text, a database of text, which could be spoken or written text. I'll just give you two examples, two applications of corpus linguistics that we use in our everyday life. One is the machine translators. So the recent machine translators, they work with corpus linguistics because it means you have a machine learning system which was trained by in a corpus which had millions of sentences of a language A, and then the translation of those millions of sentences in language B. So you use the co-aligned corpus so that the system learns how to translate from one sentence to the other, and then you bring a sentence that is not known, the system already knows how to translate it. The other example of corpus linguistics that in our everyday life is these assistants for, as we have at home, like a Siri phone or Alexa. The system Alexa is for Google, if I'm not mistaken. So those assistants that you give a voice command. So those ones were trained with large corpus of, in this case, spoken text. So this is quite useful. I also find useful to use a corpus of English, which is available on the internet, as a reference. So when I don't know how to use an expression, or I don't know how to use a word in English, rather than just Googling it using Google, because I can go to a site which was not written by native speakers, or for someone who may not know the language. So I usually refer to a corpus. I tend to use this Coca corpus, which is for American English. And there you see, for instance, for the word study in 2014, there were almost 145,000 entries for the word study, which can be a verb and also a noun. And you have that used in context. So if you don't know how to use an expression, you can go to a corpus, because there you find certified text, English that's certified by linguists. So learning by example. So you're going to imitate how others do it, but in addition to looking at how people say it, how the authors say it, how they write something, you also know of the language, the way a paper is structured, the way the sections and subsections are organized. Obviously, you are not going to copy text as is. The factual information is your own. And even though we are learning by example, it has nothing to do with plagiarism. When I created this strategy in the late 80s and early 90s, I never worried about it because when I created it, it's just for my own use. So plagiarism was not an issue because I had full control of how I use it. So I was never worried about it. But now, every time I give a lecture like this, I insist that this strategy is for you to gain diversity, for you to have different ways of saying the same thing or writing the same thing in English. Is not plagiarism because you're going to use your own words at the end of the day, even though you are going to learn expressions which are usually frozen expressions in English that have been used for many years, for decades or centuries. So you're not going to copy verbatim other authors' text. You don't copy from earlier papers, including your own. That's something which has to be said here. Even when you copy, if you copy text from an earlier paper, even if it's your own paper and you are the only author, it's also plagiarism. So you cannot do it. You can never copy text verbatim. Obviously, you can quote, so you can reproduce text from another source and put between inverted commas or in italics. Then you are quoting text. You are quoting what another person or even yourself in a previous paper said. But except from that, you can never copy text. You can never copy from any source, even including from your own papers. So there are 9 steps for you to practice this strategy. The first one is obviously to select reliable sources. I like, for instance, books. Books are excellent because they are always well written and they are very good for some of the messages they want to convey. So obviously it's better to choose text produced by a native speaker, and then you have to read all of this text critically. But here there is an observation to be made. Since we're early child, since we started learning, always the teachers and our parents or colleagues always tell us that you can only write well if you read a lot. That's true. There's no doubt about it. But now, if you, for instance, imagine, for instance, that you have to learn English. You have to learn scientific writing now, as a young professor or as a graduate student. You do not have the time to read in English until you learn how to write well. You need shortcuts. And the strategy I'm going to teach you today is a shortcut because you're going to read a lot, but not reading the way you used to. You are not going to understand what is there. You are not reading the contents, but for the format, the things are said. So you can go scan through a lot of text at once because you don't have to be paying attention to details. If you're reading a paper, for instance, a physics paper for this purpose, for the purpose of this here, you do not have to understand the equations or understand whether the derivation of the ideas is correct. What you have to pay attention to is how things are written. If someone is giving a description or someone is comparing results, if someone is making a definition, how this is done, that's where you have to pay attention. So the first step is select your sources. The second is now you have to compile expressions and sentences. So you have to identify sentences and expressions that say, oh, this can be useful for my later use. Then you have to compile them, copy them. As I'm going to show later on the original corpus. In those times, because there was no electronic text, I had to type everything. So I would type just the sentences or expressions and dots and save a type I had to make. You can cut and paste and different colors for the parts that you say, oh, this is an expression use again, or part of it. In part of the sentence, you're not going to use in another subject, which is your own subject or not your own cells that are going to put there. So you have to compile those expressions and sentences and mark the distinct messages, which means you have to somehow index. Otherwise, you have of sentences and expressions, need them to retrieve them, you won't find them. So the strategy to think about now is a strategy in which organize expressions and sentences. And so you have to find the easiest way to find it is choose, for instance, to this part here. So if you are writing, you have a text from an introduction, you go get a sentence from an introduction, and then you identify which it comes from, come from the sentence and so on, and then you wind the sentence or expression to those stages. That would be the do it. It's easier, I'm assuming, because you know where the sentences come from. So easier, quicker, but then we'll practice shuffling the mirror and then classifying, because that's the second strategy. The second strategy, go back to that. The second strategy, what you do is the following. You make a list of hundreds of thousands of sentences and expressions, and then you sort of shuffle those all, and then you try to identify which one where they could go to paper. Mind you that some sentences can belong to more than one section or two sections, so there's no problem if you have the same different parts of your corpus. So the way to do it for the abstract, I take an abstract from one side, because you read the paper and you see things. He was given a lesson. He writes the way that we talk text in a scientific paper. You text, you have a gap, you have purpose, methodology, so reading one or anybody's abstract, you clarify the sentences according to the components and edges. And then if you think that this sentence is copy and put in the text of the abstract or corpus. So the patient is Julia, I mentioned already. Actually, one of, as I said before, you have to say in different ways. So you have ways of conveying the same message, the same rhetorical message. Example here, the purpose of for instance, you may use this passage, this letter analysis, so you can look into define many different ways in which this is said. The advantage is that you face on the same thing, and second, if you are taking expressions from the literature and welcomes, as you produce your own, is correct because you took from something knowledgeable. This is an extract of original corpus. So when I did this in the late, I have no idea what was in Corpus Linguistics never been used. So then, from my knowledge later on, were the first used. And titles that I use for the topics were now in scientific writing. Now, I want to say important. So this is setting 0. One thing, if you read my original, you are going to notice. First is that It's just more or less usual why these more things. So not long, but long exams, well, being substantially interesting, I don't use it anymore. Now the tendency is more and more concise, as verbose than in the past. What you notice is that that I use and I didn't copy everything because to save my time. A few years ago, a link from Manchester University produced an academic phrase bank. So there's a phrase bank very similar to a corpus, similar to one. At least part of it is available freely in the internet, so you can get the corpus. And you see that's similar to this, but made by and organizer. This was all done by Intuition. But I lecture, or in the scientific writings that we give here, I always insist that you may have a corpus that self-produced so that you can use it as a reference, as an example, but the best thing for you to learn is to produce your own corpus. You should find the expressions, to find the sentence, to see where they fit best. Because this learning process is an important one, more than having the original corpus. By the way, all the English I know for scientific writing is in a 31-page document with sentences like this. That's my original corpus. All English I ever used is content that 31 document. The thing is, I learned to use those expressions, and then I used to learn how to combine them. I learned to combine them. So the 5. You're going now to fill in with your own material. So you have some frozen expressions that everybody uses, so that's you can use those, no problem. But then you have to fill in your own content. As you do it, you may realize that you do not have enough material for writing everything that you want. This means that your corpus is still not complete. It's not sufficient comprehensive to cover all you need. So you have to go back some steps and collect more material, identify other strategies, classify them, and so on and so forth. Now, assuming that you now have material for filling in all those sections and subsections of all of an entire paper. So you have expressions for all of those, for the abstract, introduction, results and discussion, and so on. Now, I always recommend that you go back into a corpus, or you can try and find some more sentences, and then you classify part of your corpus according to some rhetorical messages, which are very useful and which can appear in many different places in a paper, like sentences that can describe, contrast, confirm, define, compare, introduce. For instance, one of the most difficult things in writing a paper is when your results or your data do not agree with the literature, but you are confident that you are right, and then you have to justify that, justify why your data are not consistent with the literature. And this is very tricky because you may have to criticize other authors, you may have to say that they are not right, and you have to do it in a very subtle way, so that if one of those authors is the referee of your paper, you are not going to be rejected just because you you hurt feelings of other scientists. So there are different difficult things for you to say in a paper. And if you identify how people did it beautifully in other cases, you can go and collect that information and put in your corpus. So part of your corpus will have a section. Your corpus will have a section in which you have expressions classified according to these rhetorical messages. This is what I explained. Obviously, a piece of text is not just a juxtaposition of sentences. You're not just joining sentences and you have a paragraph. No, you need to combine sentences in a way in which you have cohesion and coherence in your text. You need to have a flow of your prose. And then there are many things that you have to order. First, the sentences cannot be too big, otherwise it will be impossible to process. They cannot be too short, because otherwise it's a sort of boring text if you have too many short sentences. So you have to find the right balance. And second, you need to connect one phrase with the other. And this is a very tricky thing for us, the multinational authors, because in many cases we do not really know how to use some connectives properly. You may say that's very simple and very easy, because if you attend the English lessons when you are learning, probably you have lessons in which your teacher taught you how to use those connectives. But you would be surprised to see how many times I see these connectives misused, and therefore the reader may be confused. And there is another question that I always point out, which is the following. In a single paragraph, if you use, say, two howevers, or you use however twice, you get your reader confused, because then you don't know whether the concession which comes after the second however, whether that concession refers to something which came just before the second however, or something which came before the first however. You see, by my explanation, you are already getting lost. And so does the reader when he or she reads a piece of text with two howevers close to each other. So using right the connectives is essential for you to have a piece of text which is proper. Now it's time to produce a complete section, because now you have sentence by sentence, you build paragraphs, but now you have to check whether, for instance, the introduction obeys this movement that you write from the general to the specific, whether you do not have a zigzag in the argument, that you go back and forth. That's something that you should always avoid. You have to see whether subcomponents were well selected, whether there is a logic argument in your reasoning, and check obviously the connectives and the coherency of your text. So this is step 8. Now you have the full text produced, and then you will say, oh, the paper is ready, the manuscript is ready to be submitted. And my answer is no. Nobody should ever, even if it's a draft or a report that you give to your supervisor, you should never do it before you read the text again. Read it through the whole thing and edit it. So the number 9 step is to edit the text. Check for spelling and grammar. I know that the grammar checkers are not perfect, so you do not have a good tool for checking precisely, just checking with high accuracy the grammar. But spelling, there is no excuse to make a spelling mistake, for 2 reasons. First, the spelling checkers are usually very good, very comprehensive, and they only lack proper names or very technical names of chemical compounds, for instance. But in these 2 cases, if you're writing a proper name in your paper, or if you're writing something which is very specific, a nomenclature or a compound or something which is not of common use for the lay people, then you are obliged. I mean, you must know how to spell it, because if you're writing an author's name, you should know how to write it properly. So there is no excuse for spelling mistakes any longer. Obviously, you need to eliminate unnecessary words, which is one of the most terrible things in text today. Usually, when I revise a piece of text for my students or collaborators, I tend to cut at least 10–15% of the text without changing anything, without decreasing any contents, without changing. So there is no change in the contents, and yet I have 10 or 15% less words, simply by making the text more concise, eliminating unnecessary words. Examples of unnecessary words, as for example. So if you say as, you are already exemplifying. You don't need to have for example. Obviously, you have to check consistency of the subcomponents, and then now everything that I've been talking to you about is about text, the format, the way you say things. But obviously, now as you are close to submitting your manuscript, you have to check the contents as well, whether it's complete and accurate as well. Now, let me summarize with a checklist before submission to your supervisor or to a journal. So there is I think 3 slides with the list. Is the article well organized in terms of sections? So the sections make sense. The introduction comes from the general, makes the movement general from the general to the specific, and so on and so forth. The abstract, as you know, is one of the most important parts of the manuscript. So are the main components there? You have the clear purpose sentence, that defining sentence is there, is well defined. The title is correct. The title is sufficiently short. Titles should be as short as possible, but obviously they cannot be too short, otherwise you just have a generic statement. But it should be as short as it can be, but it must reflect the sentence, the defining sentence of your work. And check whether the background component is not over long. In many cases, authors tend to very long over very long over, very long background component in the abstract. So the abstract should have just 1 or 2 sentences of background, a clear purpose sentence. You should have all the results and contributions there, and then a concluding sentence in the end. So you should check that before you submit. Then, when you go to the discussion results, you have to be aware that in many cases, authors mix facts with arguments, which is terrible because the reader gets lost. The reader can never be in doubt whether, when you are mentioning a result, whether there's a result obtained in that particular manuscript, that particular work, or if it's results from the literature, or whether there is a fact, the result that you observed, and then you are interpreting the result. So this mixture of facts and arguments is terrible for comprehending, for understanding a manuscript. So you have to be aware of that. And then whether the conclusion obeys the movement which is opposite to the introduction. So this is for the overall structure of the paper. Now you get into the text. Do the paragraphs have an adequate size? It's I very often find paragraphs which are too short. So like droplets of information. Paragraphs should be of a reasonable size. They should have a strong starting sentence, and they should be self-contained. you should not be putting several paragraphs together which are related, especially if they are too short. You have to verify the cohesion and coherence in the arguments, pay attention to the connectives, as I mentioned before, verify whether there is no repetition, description, and argument. That an argument is repeated 2 or 3 times. I remind you that the 5 parts of the paper is no problem. In fact, they should have, it should appear in more once, at least 3 or 4 times, but it has to be said in different ways. And then, as I mentioned here, the main contribution, this defining sentence should be in the abstract, it results in discussion and conclusion. The wording should be different every time. And now are sort of more finds of the text. Check spell the limit and unnecessary words. Verify the sentences. If the sentences are too big, you should cut them. And then that's an very important. It's very used. I mean, most of us now write papers in groups with authors, 3 or 5 authors. And since I get the manuscript after several authors saw it. And then I get to a point that I said, wait, do not understand what's written there. I can't follow the argument. And then I ask myself the question, those who read it before me, did they understand? And in most cases, I said, I bet they didn't. But they may say, oh, look, I didn't understand, but perhaps because Larry or because I don't know English enough, but you know, my supervisor will fix it. Let him do it, or let her do it. No. If you're reading a manuscript in which you're an author and you don't understand something, go back to the authors who wrote that part and ask them. Make sure that you understand. Because if you don't understand it, what are the chances that the readers will? The readers will never understand if you don't understand, you are an author yourself. So that's something which is important. Before you submit, or even before you give to your supervisor, you must make sure that you understand what is in there. You must make sure that you understand what's written in the manuscript. You may say, look, this learning by doing is tedious. You may be already feeling tedious or some tediousness in my listening to me. There are too many steps, too many expressions, too much reading, too much homework. But I tell you, once you learn this, you are going to learn how you're going to be a competent writer. And I don't think we can offer more than that. And then there are important disclaimers. The first is that I've seen people using this strategy and learning and having a level of written English, scientific written, which is really good. And it gave me tremendous pleasure. So I saw many people benefit from this strategy. But in all cases, it's not because the strategy is efficient, but it's because the students or the researchers put an effort on that. They practice it, or otherwise they would not have learned. The other thing is that this strategy is not for someone to learn English. For the mere reason that it only works fine, only efficient, if the person who is practicing it can read properly, can read and understand when something is well written or not. So this already requires some basic background knowledge of the user of this strategy. And therefore, if someone really cannot master the language, has to study English before he or she can benefit from this strategy. With this, I finish, and I will be very happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osvaldo, for the very, very nice talk. I am expecting that the students will ask questions. They are the main objective of this talk is to get the students interested in trying to improve their paper writing. I have a question. If nobody has a question, Edson, Margareta, someone has a question? Yeah, Edson, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice talk. Yeah, I'm in the process of learning how to write a paper. So, but you have addressed in your presentation some problem that I usually face with myself, and also when I read text coming from students. For instance. There are some problems that beyond the language. For instance, how to organize how we organize the ideas and put them on a paper. In this method, I look that the person should have already their ideas well structured first, or because you make what should appear in an outline and so on and so forth. So this is an idea that's beyond the language, even in Portuguese. So essentially, you suggest first to practice Portuguese and then to English, or for Portuguese speaking people? How do
I think, yeah, you touched on a very important point. And in fact, what I said in terms of scientific writing, perfect is one in which they know how to structure, how to apply content, and doesn't master the language either. And nothing come out of it. So you this as two separate problems. Address the second problem is to organize the content, choose the best, to findings, choose what you're going to. This is political agenda. That's to Portuguese, Chinese, English. It doesn't language. So this has separately from the part of language. What I do together, you can address the two together if you use these strategies of linguistics, because you can do things. You can text your structure, how you organize your result, how you go making the discussion, and you collect the scientific discourse that in English. So, but they have two separate problems, which is completely language independent, both, because types to organize that paper in a way and well organized. They also need to convey the ideas in proper English. Challenging, but to do it, you become a competent scientist. It's much easier for you, and you say that's the of thing. If you learn writing well, you save a lot of time. You have to write. You know exactly how to do it. You have your mind. An abstract without thinking those schematic mind. These are I cannot write abstract. I have structure that I teach. It's simple for me, but this makes it easy. I know what I have to choose. I know how to suggest using the wording and choosing obviously identifying contributions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The connect's a little bit bad, but I could grasp the main message. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question. I understand that the Chinese universities, the big Chinese universities, they are investing in having an office, let's say, or an institute. I don't know exactly how this works, of people whose work is to help the authors to produce a good paper written in English. And I have seen, by checking on the archive mostly, the quality of some papers with 100% Chinese authors is really good. It's outstanding. The English is you can barely distinguish from a native speaking. So I see this as the institution recognizes the importance of that. The institution recognizes that the country is in a disadvantage in relation to countries where the English is more widespread. This happens in Europe too. You meet many people in Europe who speak 2-3 languages. One of them is English, and their English is quite fluent. So you imagine that they will have an easier time writing, so there is no need for that. But would say that Brazil is not China, the distance between the languages is not so big, but still is a problem. And how do you see what is the role that the institution should play to make this transition from, in general, we write bad papers. We have to face that because of this difficulty with the English. How to make this transition to be where the reader says, okay, this is it's pleasant to read. It's not a pain. It's not painful to read, because that obscures the science. How would you, if you thought about that, how would you work with each institution or universities in this case to provide this kind of support? What would this entail?
Yeah. Actually, many universities in the world, in China, but also in other countries, including English-speaking countries. For instance, they have writing centers. The first writing center that I know of was established more than 100 years ago at Harvard University. And this is not just and this is not just for what they call multinational students, but also for the native speakers, because they wanted to have proper scientific English written, so at high level. So writing centers are perhaps the best solution that we could have. And at USP, for instance, at this very moment, we are discussing about the creation of a writing center. And I think that all universities in the country should have one. Obviously, especially now with everything can be done online. Perhaps universities could be teaming up, joining efforts to have writing centers, which could be joint writing centers. And the writing centers would provide, courses to help people to learn, tools, software tools that can help students as well, and then provide this sort of services that you mentioned. That you have, an office which helps people in revising their text, identifying the problems, because one of the most difficult things is you have to tell the student what the problem is. So that's, in many cases, it's no good saying, oh, your paper is not fine or you don't know English, but, you have to identify. It's not easy. Now, if you are trained, you can identify. Like in my case, whenever I read a paper, I always look at the paper, read it with my eyes of a guy working on scientific writing for many years. So if there is a problem that I can identify easily, it's not just a question, oh, I didn't like the paper. I said, I didn't like it because, I think here it's not clear, or this is not, the message is not well conveyed, or whatever. Because I've been trained for that. And you can train the students to identify this in their problem. We do it here, for instance, in our course, we bring abstracts or texts produced by good abstract, bad abstract, and you ask the students to criticize. They learn very quickly. I mean, after one lesson, one lecture, they are very good at criticizing. So it's easy to criticize. It's easy to see that's bad. But this is the first step. Then you know that you produce something that says, oh, this is no good because this is not how it should be. And then you start to learn how to do it the way it should be done. But writing centers is in fact, I mean, if you wish, I have this proposal of writing center at USP is very old, but now we are resuming the idea. And I have even a proposal of how the writing center should be. Obviously, this has to be updated because this was proposed in a time where everything had to be presential and so on. Now it's even easier. The time is now. The time is right to push this forward because it costs very little.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. The first or the major writing assignment for an undergrad student is the TCC, the Trabalho de Conclusão de Curso. It's my personal position that we should allow the TCCs to be written in English, but I don't think it's necessary because the structure that you presented applies to any language. So a good training would be for the students to train to write their TCCs with good quality. I think that should be emphasized. If it's written in Portuguese or in any whatever language, that it has to be. But for that, again, I believe that there should be specific courses that, like you said, you mentioned, the students learn very quickly. They are young, so they learn quickly. So maybe we need more of these courses so that the writing improves in Portuguese first and then in English. Because as you said, you will really become a good scientific English writer if you know English. There is no way around. So you have to learn English. You have to read in English. You don't have to have this done when you are 20 or 21. It's something that will only happen really when you are in your 40s. Let's face it, it's a hard life, the one we have, right? So what do you think about, I don't know how it is in USP, are the students there allowed to write their TCC in English or not?
Yeah, they are allowed to write in English. Yeah, no problem. But we have problems with TCCs, probably the same as you do in Uberlândia. We have this difficulty of students in having to write text in Portuguese or any language for the reasons we know. In my case, when I give lab for the lab courses, they have to write reports. And for instance, I demand my student a summary report. And over the years, I learned that if the summary is good, the report is good. And if it's bad, the report is, which means that I don't have to read the whole report to give the mark, so the scores. I mark just by looking at the summary, and then I check some other things to see whether they made the graphs and so on. But the summary is the most important part. And I keep telling them that they need to write a good summary because, like, for instance, engineers, if you are going to propose a business plan or whatever, you have to summarize. You need to write a good summary. And the summary is the same as we teach. It doesn't, the structure is the same. So I insist and I demand my students to write summaries for every single report that they make. It's not much because we do not have a writing course. I give a lecture in the beginning of the course, and then I keep insisting every time we talk about the report. But that's something which our universities should do, because the quality of the writing is not high, as you know. The quality of our students' writing, or even in many cases professors as well, the quality of writing is not very good, and this has to be improved because it makes a difference.
It does. Any other questions, Marleta? Edson, I would hope that the students would intervene. Marleta, go ahead.
Yes, I can go. Sure, many thanks for your talking. Okay. I remember in 1991 in EPB course. Do you remember?
Oh, you were there.
Yes.
Oh.
You are my teacher.
It was the first time that I taught scientific writing.
Yes. Then you told about the scientific language for my term, and do you start research about the linguist at that time?
Yes,
or before.
I started in 88, 87, I guess. And I started out of need because I remember that I wrote the first paper or report, and my supervisor read it, and I said whether he understood it. He said he had understood. And then I think it was a paper, and then he said he was going to rewrite it. And I said, well, but rewrite why? What is wrong? And he said, oh, there's nothing wrong. The problem is that's not the way it's said. That's not how it should be. My supervisor was not an expert in scientific writing. Scientific writing was not an issue in those times. He was an excellent writer and native, so he did it very well, but he couldn't teach. And so I got desperate because, you see, I was told, oh, it is bad, but we don't know why. He didn't know why it was bad, and I didn't know either. So I had this idea of seeing how other writers produce their papers. And I started to read and collect the sentences.
Yes.
And then I very soon realized that with a small number of sentences, I could say a lot. So I got, enthusiastic about it. And then because Christina, my wife, was also doing PhD, had similar problems. So I started collecting sentences from her field, which is computer science. And then I noticed in many cases, the sentences I could use it didn't matter which field it was. And then I started looking at the structure of the papers and so on, and I started to build my corpus. And after, I don't know how many months that I tried this, I used to do it in the evenings or over the weekends. And then my English improved a lot. And my supervisor noticed it. And I said, how? And then he asked me, how did you learn it? Because, your English has improved so much. How did you do it? And then I explained to him, I showed the list of my sentences, and then he made me promise that when I came back to Brazil, that I would try and implement something to sort of disseminate the strategy. So that's why when I came back, I went to the computer science department asking for someone who would be interested in producing writing tools, because the idea was to put this strategy in writing tools, software writing tools. So then we started in Brazil in 1991, but my work started in 87 or something.
Okay.
It was out of need and intuition, because it's simply I needed it. But I know that many people do the same. So what is on record, I was the first to put in a paper how the strategy, but I'm sure that people have used it forever. You know, everybody used this, and in fact, some people use so much that they get caught in plagiarism because they started to reproduce sentence after sentence from other papers. Then they get caught. And so my strategy is precisely to avoid that, because if you have language diversity and you learn to get things from many different fields or areas, nobody will notice that, or nobody will know that you just know. You learn because you are imitating somebody else.
Okay.
May I ask a question? Maybe the final question. You mentioned about the writing center at USP. What do you believe are the chances that the writing center is gonna be built? Let's say.
I think it's the chances are very high, okay, because the cost is not too big. The major cost is to pay for companies to revise manuscript, because you see, the most demanding thing is not the most important, but everybody wants from a writing center is the following: I have a paper here I cannot get published because it's not good. I want someone to help me. So the person said, I don't want a course, I don't want to learn this. Because I need for my master, for my PhD. And therefore, one part of the writing center, you have to be successful. You have to set aside some money to pay for this type of service. And you need to have people in-house to check whether the quality of the service is good, so that you build upon it. Then you build, and you have, say, small companies who can do it in Brazil, and then you train some of the students in the field. Then you train the students so that in a few years they don't need anymore this service anymore. They can do it by themselves, and so on and so forth. So that's, but this is expensive, because you have to start for the idea not to die. You need to pay in the beginning. So for a big university like USP, imagine that if you are prepared to pay for the proofreading or revision of, say, 1,000 papers per year, which is a not big number, then you see how much this costs. If you pay 500 reais per paper to get it revised, so it will be 500,000 reais in 1 year. So that's the most expensive part of the writing center. But I think it's a good investment, because after some time, you have more and more people who know how to do it. Then you need less and less outside help. Okay. The other thing is, it's already starting. We are already starting having companies which do it with automatic tools. Artificial intelligence tools. I think the quality is not that big. It's probably going to be not big for some time, but it will get better. And because you have artificial intelligence people working in the university, you may have people involved in this as well, in developing the tools to help revise manuscripts. And then this will lower the cost a lot once you have the software tools. So that's it. But by the way, I should have made as my first slide my mantra that I use now, that language is so important that we should teach not only our children, but also our machines. Because the main problem that you have with artificial intelligence now, the main bottleneck is in language processing, because the machines cannot interpret text. They cannot understand text. So this is the main bottleneck for artificial intelligence. If we could do it in a click, so if you have a strategy to help the machines interpret text, tomorrow artificial intelligence would be another thing. Because you see, you have robots reading the papers and doing everything on their own if they can interpret text. So teaching the machines, teaching language to the machines is now as important as teaching the humans. So you see, it's all the same thing. We have to come together because you shouldn't treat this in separate ways. You can teach your students and teach your machines at the same time.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Edson.
How do you have like a number of people that like scientists that use this type of service provided by private companies? How many?
I need to go. Many thanks, too. Goodbye.
Thanks,
okay.
Alexandre. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do not have the numbers of how
Percentage.
many people use it. No, I do not have it. And these tools are pretty new, but they will be more popular than ever because.
No, but I was mentioning the private company that provides the service. So you pay for them to revise your paper. So I think it's pretty common, I guess.
It is. Many people pay. Yeah, that's common. For instance, in the state of São Paulo, FAPESP allows you, if you have a FAPESP scholarship, FAPESP allows you to use part of your money to pay for this sort of a revision.
I never use it. I should do it because I would improve my paper.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there are good companies which provide very good service, so it may be worth. Yeah.
I know none of those.
Okay.
We are quite along the way to finishing, but I have a last question. Maybe you don't know the answer. Maybe nobody knows the answer. Do you see any change in the hegemony of English in the near future, or
no?
English is gonna be, because of the legacy, and English is so. The argument that why should I learn English if maybe Chinese is going to be I don't think this flies too. I don't agree. I think, well, and in the foreseeable future, this will not happen.
Yeah, I don't think it will happen for two reasons. First, English is too well consolidated for you to replace it with any other language. That's one thing, especially after so many people learned as a second language. And second, even if I believe China will dominate science and technology and many things, economy. There's no doubt about it. But the Chinese are preparing themselves to learn other languages, to learn English. They will not impose their language, and because first it's very difficult for other people to learn. That's one thing. It's difficult, and you see. For someone to be proficient in English, in Chinese or Japanese, it takes 8 or 10 years. So you cannot use a language like this as a lingua franca. That's impossible. No, if it takes someone 8 or 10 years to be really proficient, that's forget it. So that's not really possible. And in any case, the Chinese won't need it, because it is to their advantage that they keep the language that nobody knows, and they know the other people's languages, especially English, and they are learning. I mean, in a few years there will be more Chinese learning or more Chinese proficient in English than British or Americans, because of the population.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping that maybe the students are intimidated and they didn't want to ask questions, but anyways, I'm gonna ask you, I'm gonna send you an email asking for the slides. We're gonna post.
Yeah.
We're gonna post.
I still have questions, George. You are, it's an interesting topic, but I have to make the last question, I guess.
Okay.
So, how do you see improvement of our people in writing English? Our people, say Brazilian people in general. You first started studying this a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't see any progress being made because you see, in terms of education, our education is not getting better. I think we got more international over the last few years, and this happens because many people, young people, went abroad and then they learned. So there is some progress in there, but not much. I mean, we need to improve our ways, improve our education. Otherwise, it's really hard. You know,
That's bad.
yeah. And then we need to restart our internationalization programs because this is important for the young guys.
We can do it.
Let's hope. Yeah.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
I'm gonna send you an email asking for the slides, and we're gonna post the slides together with the audio, with the video that was recorded in our YouTube channel.
Thank you very much then. Bye.
So